What golf shaft length should you be playing? Well, the best way to figure that out is to actually try it. And I'm going to show you in this video how you can use your existing clubs to figure out what length golf clubs you should be using. Let's go. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a wonderful day. So I've done this video topic before talking about what length golf clubs you should be using. I've got a video I'll put right up here. If you haven't seen it, that gives you a very easy way to take a couple measurements based on height and the length of your arms to figure out what length golf clubs you, at least on paper, should be playing. But that is only really sort of a starting point or a guideline. The best way to really figure it out is to actually try the golf clubs at that length. So I'm going to be showing you today in this video 2 ways to adjust the length of your golf club so that you can actually try out a different length and see if it's going to work for you. Okay, first up, let's talk about trying a golf club at a shorter length. If you check that chart and it comes out that you're maybe a ½ inch or an inch under where your current clubs are, well, guess what? It is very, very simple to experiment with playing a shorter length golf club, because all we really have to do is go from where we normally grip the golf club and then just choke down the shaft, down the grip a little bit more to that new length. Another quick tip, if you're worried about being consistent in where you are gripping the golf club when you're experimenting with this shorter length, get yourself just a little bit of masking tape or some painter's tape, something like that. This masking tape is 1 inch thick. We can just wrap that right around the very top of the grip, just like that. And now you've got a perfect line there that you know that is your new top of the grip right there, and you want to grip it just below that. Now let me assure you, because some people are going to be worried, well, if I'm choking down on the golf club, is it going to give me different results from if I actually had cut the club down and re-gripped it and played it at the new length? Let me assure you that whether you cut it down and re-grip it or you just choke down, the golf club is going to perform essentially the same. All the important metrics are not going to change. Whether we're talking about how the shaft flexes and feels will not make any difference whether you choke down a little bit or you cut it down. Where the club swing weight's out to, it will again not really change it. Maybe 1 swing weight point, which is not enough to make any real difference between, again, having the golf club at full length and choking down versus cutting it down. The only real, maybe noticeable way that you will see a difference between cutting it down versus choking down is in the fact that the grip is tapered, meaning as we move further down the grip, it gets smaller. So that means if we are choking down on the grip, it is going to get a little smaller versus cutting the shaft and reinstalling the grip, in which case you're then gripping again at the very top. But that change, that small amount of a change, I do not think is enough to throw the results one way or the other. You will very quickly get used to that. And again, as a way to test it out before you actually go all in and cut those clubs down, this is a very small price to pay for something that's going to give you very accurate overall information and data. Last thing I'll say about this, and this also applies to when we go to lengthen the golf club, I would not just experiment with a single golf club when we're talking about changing the length. I wouldn't just get a 7-iron and play around with the length off of that. What I would recommend is get one of your shortest clubs and one of your longest clubs in the set that you're thinking about changing and experiment with them both so you get a better feel for what it's going to be like on the short end of your bag and on the long end. Truth is, if we're just using like a 7-iron, that's right in the middle of your bag. Half your clubs are longer and half are shorter than that. So you can kind of acclimate to that pretty quickly, even if it isn't necessarily right. It's not going to really give you that sort of, uh-oh, this was maybe a mistake that you will feel when we're talking about the really short clubs or the really long clubs, where the short ones get too short, the long ones get too long. So again, don't just do a 7-iron. Do a pitching wedge and a 5-iron or a long iron or whatever it is, but do it for a couple clubs. It's a little bit more work, obviously, but it will give you more than double, I think, the return as far as what kind of information you get, whether this is a good idea. Okay, so we've got the golf club here. Now we can do this in 2 ways. We can either use traditional grip tape and solvent to do this. The downside there is you're going to have to wait a lot longer for the tape and solvent to dry when you install the grip. It also means that taking the grips off, if you're not wanting to just cut them off, is going to be a little bit more work. I'll leave a link in case you're wondering down below in the description again if you're interested in how to remove a grip that was installed with tape and solvent. But in my opinion, if we're doing any kind of experimenting with golf clubs, then the best way to be installing and taking off grips is always going to be with compressed air, because it is so much faster, cleaner, just easier, and just better. So what are we going to need in order to do this with compressed air? Well, first off, we're obviously going to need the golf club. Secondly, we're going to need a golf grip for each golf club that we're going to do. Thirdly, we're going to need a shaft extension that looks like this, which is just in this case, a steel shaft extension. They also make them in graphite, so you could do this for graphite, so you could do this exact same experiment with a graphite shafted golf club. But it's just sort of crimped down here. This section would go into the shaft, and all this area here would then be where you can extend the golf club. We will also need some way to cut that extension, whether that is a little pipe cutter or a Dremel tool, sort of rotary saw, or a chop saw or a hacksaw. Any of those are going to work. We'll also need a little bit of masking tape. Nothing special, doesn't have to be any special kind, just basic masking tape. I think the 2-inch thick kind is going to be better. And then finally, you're going to need a tire inflator. I've had a lot of people ask me what specific one I use. I'll leave a link in the description to this specific one, but let me tell you, I've used a bunch of different ones at this point, and they all seem to get the job done. The only two things you really need to make sure they have is, one, it has to have this sort of raft style tip option that you can insert into the little vent hole in the grip. And secondly, it has to have an adjustable PSI setting that can go somewhere between 55 and 60, which I think pretty much all of them do, so that should not be an issue. First off, we're going to measure out and cut the extension. So if we're wanting to have an inch longer golf club to experiment with, that means we're going to measure from right where this crimp is and measure out 1 inch, mark it with a marker or something, and then we're going to cut this with our pipe cutter to give us that 1 inch extension. 1 inch extension goes in just like that. If we were just going to extend these clubs in a permanent fashion, this is where we would then get some epoxy after we've cleaned out the inside of the shaft and maybe roughed up the outside of the extension a little bit with some sandpaper, epoxy on both surfaces, put it together, wipe it down, let it dry, and then you've got a permanent golf club built longer. But because we are experimenting and we don't want it permanent, we're going to do something a little bit different. So if I insert this extension in here right now, we can see it has a little bit of play to it. It's very easy to sort of slide it in and out, which would be fine if we were gluing this in a permanent fashion. But for what we're doing with compressed air, we want a much more snug fit. So we're going to just take some masking tape and we're just going to wrap it around the end of the extension here, just to widen the diameter a little bit and hopefully give us a more snug fit that takes a little more effort to get in there, to move it around. So now there's no real wiggle, okay? That's part one. Part two, or step two, now we're gonna take an additional piece of masking tape, maybe two, and just put it on here like we would be putting on grip tape. I'm going to actually put a second piece of tape, again, just trying to strengthen up this little joint right here. Now this masking tape is not doing anything. It's not holding the grip on. It's not meant to be thickening the grip up or anything like that. My only reason for having it is to keep this extension in place, specifically when we go to take this grip back off. The one thing that can happen when we use this method and don't actually epoxy the extension in is if we don't put some tape here and make sure that this has a really snug joint, the extension can get stuck in the end of the grip when we take it off, and then there's no real way to get it out other than to cut the grip. So in order to not have that happen, that's why we get that joint nice and snug. That's why we put the extra tape. And now we can put that grip back on. Oops. quite get it on there. There it goes. Now it's on there nice and snug, and we now have 1 inch longer golf club. Now this is the exact same method I use here at Elite Fit Golf anytime I'm doing a fitting with someone who needs a longer golf club. We're not just going to give you a standard golf club and have you imagine what the longer one would feel like. I want you to actually be trying the length that you're fit into and that makes sense for you, at least on paper. So if it's a 1/2 inch extension, we would do the exact same thing with a shorter extension. If it's 1 inch, it's exactly what I showed you here. I've had people using this setup, these kinds of extensions, up to 1 inch, swinging well over 90 miles an hour with a 7-iron. Everything stays together. Again, we've got it bonded in here just mechanically because of the snug fit with that extra masking tape around the bottom, and then the extra tape around the top just to kind of help hold everything together. And then once you put the grip back on, it kind of seals everything together and works very well. Does not almost ever come loose. Very infrequently someone will swing or be swinging in such a way where it maybe eventually twists a little bit and starts to come loose, but that is very, very rare. So this works, again, even at very high speed. Now that being said, I will say this one warning, which is if you are wanting to experiment with a golf club that is longer than that 1 inch extension, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, something like that, I would not use this method. Let me repeat that. If you're wanting to try an extension, try a golf club length longer than 1 inch over where you currently have your clubs, I would not use this method, because at that point you are now holding a substantial amount of that golf club by the extension once you get to 1.5 inches or 2 inches. And there I think you are then putting probably a little bit too much stress, at least for me to be comfortable, to have you swinging. So again, up to 1 inch, this method I think works perfectly. If you're needing to try longer than that, well then you either have to go ahead and just epoxy everything together to actually give you a more solid bond, or go full out and reshaft them or whatever you're going to do for those longer lengths. And best of all, once we get to the end of it, whether you like it or not and you want to make it permanent or not, we can take it back apart just as easily as we put it together. All right, the only trick with taking it off is usually when you're using an air compressor to put grips on and off, you can kind of twist them around and kind of rock them back and forth to get them on and off a little easier. Because this is held together with that tape, and because we don't want it to get stuck in the end of the grip, we have to just try and let the air all by itself kind of move that grip off, and don't twist it and don't rock it back and forth, because again, that'll make it more likely the extension will get stuck and then you're out of grip and you're out of extension. And just like that, you can see right there by that little line, the extension is still nicely in place. It hasn't fallen out or gotten stuck in the grip. So then we can just take off our masking tape. And again, whether you liked this setup or not, either way, we can take it apart and either put the golf club right back together the way it was originally, or take off this tape, get out the epoxy, and make this a permanent bonded extension. Either one, very easy with compressed air. Let me know what you think of this down in the comments. Let me know if you try it. Let me know what kind of results you got from it. Hey, if you're interested in a fitting, in a custom build, in a repair, all my contact information is down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you go down below, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you'll be alerted when I post new videos, and I will see you next time.